All right. Okay, so my name is Michelle Tanksley. I know I've met some of y'all, maybe not all of y'all. I'm the Assistant Director of Finance within Business Affairs and Food Safety.
I manage the procurement and payments team here at McCombs.
So today's training is payments training. I think this is our fourth training that we've done. It's not going to be our last training, but to me, this is definitely the most important one, just because that's really what we do besides the purchasing is the payments portion of it. So within this training, we do have a few different agenda items that we'll be going over. First is just invoice reimbursement and best practices. Stacey's going to be going over all of the best practices that we have. Supporting documentation as far as when you're going to be sending something for payment. That can either be an invoice or a reimbursement to a faculty member, employee, non-employee, date stamps, loan date stamps. And then really just we're going to give y'all a preview of our new tracker by FBS, which is really essentially our payment system that we're going to. So again, we're needing to move to a new payment system because our current SharePoint that we've been utilizing for payments has become unsupported. So we're needing to transition to a new system. And within that tracker system, we want to show you really just all the functionality that it has. It's going to have a little bit more functionality at the department and have it in for everyone. There is a Define and DocuSign integration. And then just our payment services dashboard and where we're going to house all of our resources and information and links to the new tracker by FBS. Stacey, take over.
So probably the first and most important thing about processing payments or reimbursements is you have to know what it is that you're paying or reimbursing. And you have to understand the distinction between those two. A reimbursement is going to be somebody who spent their personal expenses to fund something that UT is intending to cover and could have paid or could have paid for directly out of their pocket, versus a payment to a vendor where a vendor has provided some type of service and has invoiced us for that and we are paying them. So it's really important to make sure you're using the right language so that we understand what your department is doing when there's communications there. A lot of times we hear somebody say, well, we need to reimburse a vendor for their travel expenses. And that's, I understand what you mean and why you would say that, but from UT's standpoint, that is a payment to a vendor. We are paying them for something that they did. They are the one that incurred that expense. So the next kind of best practice is, again, just making sure you know who you're paying and making sure that that vendor or payee is very clear when you're submitting a payment request. And the new system is very specific that you can only use one vendor or payee per submittal. I might also call those tracker records. Those are just kind of interchangeable in my head at the moment. So the only time I think that will change from what we've been doing previously is for cash prize awards, where you used to, some people would include a list of students who were going to be receiving those awards, and you cannot include a list now. It is one per individual. We are attempting to see if we can make some adjustments there, but those will be enhancements that come later. So right now it's one vendor or payee per record. Also really important when you are working on payments or reimbursements is documenting or referencing prior. So as we try to remind everybody and just kind of keep everybody in the loop, basically everything that has to be purchased by UT has to have some kind of approval prior to it being purchased. Most things are not reimbursable. The exception to that are food, entertainment expenses can be reimbursed, memberships, subscriptions. There's a very minor handful of other things that are reimbursable, but for the most part, people should not be paying out of pocket for much of anything. We really are trying to move everybody away from using personal funds and really work on getting things done. So part of when you provide a payment request to my team, what we're looking for is where is your priority? So we want to make sure everybody's informed on the best way to reference those. Michelle, you'll go ahead and hit. First, you might have a PO. If you have a PO in place, you've submitted a purchase request through the request form system, the PO number is documented there. I want to point out that all we need is the PO number. You don't have to print out any kind of documentation. You don't need a copy of the PO. You don't need a printout of the request form. We don't want the request form number. We want the PO number, which is in the format of 20, followed by whichever fiscal year we're in. It's usually, currently it's 23. And then a letter, might be A, it might be C, could be other letters. And then a 5-digit unique identifier after that. That number is available to you on your request form. You can find it there. That's the only piece you need. In Tracker, there's a field that will ask you when you're making a payment against a PO for your PO number. That is the only number you can put into that field. Additionally, there are contract numbers for most of our contracts going forward. Anything that has been submitted through Contracts Plus has a unique contract number. Again, the format for that is 20 with the year, and then underscore followed by a 4-digit unique identifier number. And that is the number we are looking for exclusively with contracts. This represents one of the biggest changes going forward. You no longer need to attach contracts if they are Contracts Plus contracts. So the exception to that is AT&T contracts. If you have those, if you don't know what I'm talking about, that this doesn't probably apply to you, but we will go more in depth into these a little bit later on. Similarly with RTAs, if you're paying direct bill travel expenses and you have a traveler with an RTA, we don't need you to go to define and print out the RTA. We don't need you to give us the request number where you requested the RTA. We are exclusively looking for the TV RTA number. Again, that's in define, that shows up on your request system. That's the piece we're looking for. We don't want doc IDs. These are the pieces. Generally speaking, our goal for payment handling is to take care of things within 5 to 7 businesses. That's kind of our standard timeline. I will forewarn you that with this new transition that is new to you, it is also extremely new to us. We will probably be going a little bit slower. We also are trying to play catch up and finish out the things that are have already been submitted in SharePoint. So sometimes that could be a little bit longer. Sometimes we may be getting to those things quicker. We just want to make sure that everybody is aware. That's our standard time, and you need to allot at least that much time just for the McCombs payment team portion. After it goes to us, it goes to the Office of Accounting, and they typically have their own timeline. Right now, they're at 2 to 3 weeks on things. So again, they ebb and flow as well.
And to me, this timeline can really change depending on the time of year, fiscal year and deadlines. It can get a little bit heavier as far as the workload, so that timeline is going to change. So like Stacey said, this is just really kind of what we're going to strive for as our standard time frame, but it's going to ebb and flow as well.
We also want to remind everybody that the kind of first course of action, if you have questions or concerns or need help understanding something, is to reach out to your departmental AOM. Michelle and I are big proponents of, we're happy to help you, and we will always take on whatever you've given us. And we always mention that, but we do want to say it should be AOMs first. And then collaboratively, if your AOM isn't able to provide you with an answer, you guys come to us together so that we can train your AOM as well, so that next time, maybe they are better equipped to answer that question. So one of the key factors with payments is supporting documentation. There are a very wide variety of pieces that are needed in order for us to make sure we are compliant with UT policies and procedures. There hasn't really been much of a written reference for what types of things you would need in what situation prior to now. We have created this McCombs support documentation guide that is a loose starting point. The goal of this page is to help you think through, what are we doing? We need you to know, again, is this a payment or is this a reimbursement? And then depending on which one you're looking at, you'll either look at the left column for payments to a vendor or the right column for reimbursements to an individual. At the top of the table, there is some items listed in bold. And those bold items are things that are required every single time, no matter what. There is no exception to that. These pieces must be there. The regular text items are things that you might need. And we just kind of listed the most common, these are the things you might need. Not every one of these applies to every type of payment. We can't really get into all of that nuance because there are so many different instances. So it's really, again, just a guide to help you think about, do I need to reference a contract with this? Is there a third-party check pickup memo that I'm looking for? Am I trying to prepay something? So that you've thought about and clearly understand what you're requesting us to do so that we can just take it from you and move, and we don't have to come back and ask a lot of questions.
And just to kind of reiterate this, the items that are in bold, those are not just McCombs requirements, those are UT requirements. So that's why we have them in bold. Again, so that's not bolded, those are just items that could be depending on the payment type, but that's why we're going to make sure in reference, the reason why the items that are in bold, those are UT requirements.
A couple things I want to hit on here and draw special attention to are itemization. Itemization is always required, whether you have an invoice or whether you have a receipt that you are reimbursing to somebody. We have to see what items were purchased. We cannot just see that somebody paid $60 or that a vendor is asking for $60. We have to pick specific object codes correlating to what was purchased. So if your itemized receipt says some weird part number that is meaningful only to the manufacturer or the vendor, give us a little bit of notes on what you purchased so that we don't have to come back to you and ask questions. The second part of that on the reimbursement side of things, we have in separate boxes, itemized receipt and documentation of payment. Depending on the situation, those might be two separate pieces. It could also be one. Sometimes you get an itemized credit card receipt that shows the itemization of your details as well as payment made via credit card. Documentation of payment means it shows how it was paid using personal funds. Documentation of payment is not, this was paid with a gift card or a voucher. UT will not reimburse those types of expenses. You have to show that it was paid using personal funds.
We have had instances, I mean, even in my previous experience before McCombs, where someone tried to get reimbursed with a gift card, UT will not allow it. So just don't ever have anybody use a gift card to make a purchase for me, because they're just going to be out of the pocket for that expense then.
Okay, I think we're ready for this. All right, once you've compiled all of the pieces, you know what you're paying and you're ready to submit it through the tracker system. Much like at least the AOMs are accustomed to, I'm not sure how each department has worked previously. We are looking for a single PDF file that has been, basically has everything included that we need. It's got your date stamps on it, it's got your supporting documentation, your non-employee travel authorization form, or your prepayment form, etc., all inclusive. It needs to be legible and fit to a normal size page when you open that PDF file. One of the things that we see very frequently that AP cannot work with, and we have to struggle to correct a lot, is Excel files. If you have a spreadsheet with a lot of information on it, and it prints out as 30 different pages with, you know, these first 5 columns for the first 10 page, and then the second 5 columns for the next pages, and then so on and so forth, and it's hard to correlate it. That's not useful to AP. So if you're running into a situation like that and you need help, look up how to print that, reach out if you need help to get that into a means that is useful to AP. What happens is the PDF file that we provide to them, while we can enlarge and move things, it gets uploaded to the image retrieval system in a lower quality copy that doesn't have notes. It can't be edited all that much, so it gets really grainy. So we're trying to make every effort that we can to make things legible on the front end. A lot of times those spreadsheets have more information than we need, so we can help guide you on what's the important pieces that have to show for AP. We also ask that you flatten and reduce those. The AP requires that we have either a physical DocuSign or certified digital signature to confirm receipt of goods and services. And what we have found since the pandemic using the certified digital signatures is sometimes those fall off. It's really weird, but when my team saves files or when we add our cover page in or things like that, oddly, sometimes the whole date stamp falls off, sometimes just the signature falls off, sometimes random other pieces fall off. So there's some steps you can take. We've got some information in the FAQ, and we'll talk more in detail about those steps that you can take during some later training. We also, the tracker has a file size limit of 10 megabytes. So taking out contracts is a big part of that. That should reduce file sizes a lot. But occasionally you might see something that's bigger than that and need to reduce the file size. We also want to make sure that excess documentation is not included in these packets. If you have duplicate pages, blank pages, those types of things, Michelle, I think have it there. Go in. Those should be taken out before it's sent to my team. My team shouldn't have to do that work. That just slows down how quickly we can get through our quite large queue of payments for the entire school. If you are not sure if something should be included, talk to your AOM, talk to us about it. Don't just throw it in there, because a lot of times we get excess documentation that is totally irrelevant, but it looks like it could mean something else that is relevant, and then we have to stop and come back to you and ask questions. And sometimes there's excess conversation that happens because of that. Additionally, if you are using DocuSign to obtain signatures, we do not need the certification pages and the terms and conditions pages that are part of DocuSign. Again, when you flatten and reduce your file size using the steps that we recommend, you're able to edit and take out those pages as needed. So we'll, again, talk a little bit more about that later on. One thing that is required on every single reimbursement or vendor payment is date stamps. This is a UT requirement, and it is specific to particular items. So this is an example of a date stamp that I've created in Adobe. It's kind of an automated stamp. After this training, we're happy to help get anybody set up with those that we need. The important things to know are that the goods and services date stamp has to show the actual date that items were received. If you have not received your items yet, you should not be paying for them unless you have a prepayment memo. Additionally, if you are paying for services or a subscription or a membership that are going to take place over an extended period of time, This date stamp needs to include the full date range. AP will not approve a payment or a reimbursement for a subscription or a membership that does not have a date range. And then again, whoever has received the goods or services needs to be named, and then there needs to be a signature from someone in the department confirming that. Then additionally, there is an invoice received stamp that is required. This stamp is the first date that someone at UT Austin received the copy of the final invoice. And what we mean by final invoice is it's official, it's itemized, it has the unique identifier, and it is not wrong. If you get an invoice from a vendor such as AT&T and they've charged you for something that you didn't end up getting, and you have to work with them to get an updated invoice, your invoice received date is when you get the new correct invoice. If a vendor sent you sent an invoice to somebody, say in October of last year, and at that time, there was an admin who was working with your department and they have since left. They left, say, in December, and in January, it comes to your attention that there is this invoice. That invoice was received in October. So that is your invoice receipt date. Invoices that are received through the MSB accounts payable email address, which are primarily right now just PO related invoices, we are adding that invoice date stamp, so there is no question about that. No signature is required for the invoice receipt. Only signature is for goods and services.
So, and then more information as far as date stamps. Why are really date stamps important? Because that's really when our net 30 terms kind of take effect. So the net 30 terms is the end date of the latter, either the invoice receipt date or your goods services end date. So if we receive this 4/18, but the goods end date, so you don't really receive these till the end of April, our net 30 starts at the end of April, not when the invoice was received. But UT still requires us, we need to know when that invoice was initially received. Because we know vendors will sometimes do that. As soon as we send the PO, they'll go ahead and send the invoice, but we haven't received the goods or services yet. So again, that's just kind of the more information regarding dates and why they're so important.
All right, let's jump into the news system.
Bear with me, I need it in my.
You're gonna take questions in the chat at the end. Did you say?
Yeah, we will look for questions at the end. We've got a slide for that, and I'll come back to the chat during that time to answer questions.
So what you see on the screen now and those remote, this is essentially the home screen of when anybody within McCombs goes into the Tracker by FBS. So it will say Tracker by FBS underneath that. It's gonna let you know what instance you're in, and it should always say McCombs. So the reason why it needs to say McCombs, because this is actually a system that's utilized by another unit across campus. So we're basically sharing the database with the other unit. It might be possible when you first initially log in, it might say BFS, but as soon as you create something or refresh, it's gonna automatically say McCombs. And then it's gonna tell you dashboard 4. If it's Molly that's logging in, it's gonna say Molly's name there. And now you no longer have to go to another screen or another section to see what invoices are for your department or what invoices you submitted. Those are all gonna be shown here on your main home screen. When you're ready to submit an invoice, and one thing that I do wanna point out, this system will not allow you to submit something and save for later. So you can't go back to something and then forget about it. So this is you, as soon as you're ready to submit an invoice or a reimbursement for payment, that's when you need to go in here.
It automatically comes to our team and we'll assign it out, and you can't mess with it once it's been assigned to us. So there's not a save for later.
So it has very specific,
Sometimes I have to click.
Okay, it has specific PO invoice, non-PO invoice, contract invoice, entertainment invoice, and or reimbursement. Those are the ones that really all the clients are gonna use. You will also see this pro card log for payment. Those are only for your AOMs to submit the entire VP7, so the charges that were made that previous month on that VP7. So as far as client-wise, that y'all will not be utilizing that. That is only gonna be specific for AOMs to get their VP7 and supporting documentation and receipts to our payments team for processing. So just going back up to the PO invoice, you'll click on that and you can see it automatically puts what department I'm in. It automatically has my EID number, my department contact, my contact email, and my phone number. So that's just automatic information that goes in. I'm the submitter, but I'm gonna also act as the department contact. So say for instance, Michaela, if you're submitting something on behalf of somebody else, whoever the department contact is, whoever the payments team needs to reach out to if they have any questions. So if you're gonna be the one to answer those questions, just leave your name in there. If it's gonna be somebody else that can answer those questions, that's when you're gonna wanna just input different information here. But other than that, if you're the submitter, and you're the one that's gonna be answering questions, leave that as is. It has a spot here for you to input the PO number, and again, that same 10 digits format that you're gonna wanna use, the 20XX, A, B, C, whatever the PO is, and then your 5 digits afterwards, and an invoice number. So the one thing on the PO, there is logic in the system. If you enter 2022 A 1 2 3 4 5, and then you have an invoice number 5 6 7 8, and you hit submit at the end, it will automatically let you know if that PO and that invoice number was already submitted in the system. It's going to alert you and say that's a duplicate. So it's going to help cut down on any duplicates. Now, if there's a transposition of numbers, then of course it won't, but it does have that logic in there, so you're not submitting a duplicate. Then we have vendor name and amount. There is not an account number field on here. The reason why we don't have an account number field on here is because it's the account that's already associated with the PO. If you're submitting an invoice and you're like, oh, we need to go ahead and actually not utilize the account number that's on that PO, before you submit it in here, you need to send a purchase request, you need to send a change order request for that purchase to the
Not sure they can hear us yet. They haven't responded.
Welcome back.
Oh, hello. Okay, we can see and hear you. Great. We'll continue on. Thank you for good.
Oh, whoa, actually. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think where we left off, we're gonna start talking about just the different priority levels that are gonna be within each submittal when you're in tracker. Really, when you open up a submittal, as you can see, this automatically defaults to normal. Now, if we want to update the priority status, the normal is, as we mentioned earlier, our state, the payments team, normal processing time, 5 to 7 business days. It can fluctuate depending on workload. Then there is also a priority level. So what the priority level does is it just bumps up that particular tracker record into the payments queue just for them to process. But it takes the normal time as far as if it's something that needs to go to main accounts payable for final approval, it takes their standard approval time. As Stacey mentioned, right now, they're 2 to 3 weeks behind. If something needs to be rushed, Rush is actually going to then require you to submit notes in here. And a rush submittal will actually do an automatic email to the payments team that there is something that is, there's a tracker record that needs to be rushed. But those notes can't just be, please rush. Please rush, not a valid reason. So we need a valid reason as far as why something needs to be rushed. Again, it's not just for our payments team, but it's also for our payments team to then send the rush request to main accounts payable, and they're gonna want a valid reason of why we're submitting it.
So just a quick couple examples. We have these on the FAQ page as well so that you can go back and reference it. Examples of when we need to rush something is a vendor will give us a 5% discount if we pay it within the first 10 days. Or this invoice was received back in October and the goods and services were back in October and we're now in April and it didn't get paid on time. So we are significantly past due. That's a valid reason for a rush. The vendor has asked for us to expedite this is not a valid reason. When we work with vendors, we have contracts or POs in place, both of which specify net 30 terms. They refer to the State of Texas Prompt Payment Act, which again counts that 30 days from the ladder of your goods and service end date or your invoice receipt date. So we will be monitoring those. We may change your payment status if you haven't provided us a clear enough reason and it's not obvious to the team that it is in fact a true rush.
And with those, I mean, again, university is net 30. There might be vendors that their terms are net 15. That's a good point. The university is net 30. So we're going off of the university's net terms, not that vendor's net terms. So the other thing that you see in here is exception of pending. Don't even worry about that. Again, this is a system that's utilized by another unit. They use that. We already have an exception process in place. So anytime that you're submitting an invoice or reimbursement to anybody that's, again, remember that is over $1,000 and we need to have that purchasing exception approval, you need to be getting that prior before you submit it into the system. No, again, the notes on here, again, that's required if you're submitting something as a rush. But if there's any other helpful information that will help the payments team to process this invoice and or reimbursement, that's where you want to utilize that. Again, it's not required, it's an optional field for any of that information here.
Do be cautious what you put in that notes section, because if you are referring to things incorrectly, if you say this is a reimbursement when it's in fact a payment to a vendor, that's going to prompt my team to have to ask questions and come back to you and take more time on things. So just don't just write a novel in that section just to cover your bases, because sometimes more is, it's not that.
And it's okay to leave it blank unless it's a rush. Okay. And then just a file upload. So what this is doing is you're submitting your invoice and any other supporting documentation. Here, you have the file and then you submit invoice. So as far as on the client's end, section, once you hit submit invoice, you're done. You will no longer get an email with the Nintex cover sheet that you have to then combine with your invoice and email it to your AOF. Those are steps that are going away. You hit submit, one and done. You can move on to your next invoice or your next reimbursement that you need to submit into the system. As far as non-PO and contract invoices, these are built listed. So the first part is going to be the same. It's going to auto input your information in there. This one will have the vendor invoice number, the payee name, amount, and now you're going to see an account number. So again, we need the account number because especially non-POs, these are items that did not have any type of prior approval to them. There wasn't a purchase order, there wasn't a contract, or it wasn't paid on credit card. Yes, you will see DTNs and defined codes. DTNs are no longer. So mostly these are going to be fields that we won't utilize. Currently, we're utilizing defined code 3. It is going to be our goal to move away from defined code 3s because we're starting to map our defined code 3s to the university's object codes. Departments that utilize defined code 6 for any internal reporting, that's where you're going to utilize defined code 6. So these fields right here, it would be defined code 3 and defined code 6. If you don't utilize defined code 3 for any internal reporting, then right now, until we map out our defined codes to the object codes, you're going to need to input something in there.
So a quick note on the vendor name field as well as your invoice number field. You really want that to be as perfect a match as you can make it to the invoice. Because again, like Michelle mentioned, there are some audits in the system to reduce duplicate payments. But if one person writes that city and the next person who tries to submit that invoice writes that city awards, it will not audit that as a duplicate. So again, take the vendor name from the invoice, put it in exactly as it appears there. Similarly with an invoice number, they've got a dash or a space, include that, keep it as exact a match as you can.
A couple of things I want to point out when you're getting to an amount, you don't need to put a dollar sign. You don't need to put a comma for any thousand to thousand, but you can put a decimal point.
In fact, you cannot put a dollar sign
Yes.
or a comment. The form will not let you move forward. It'll tell you there's an issue. That's what the issue is.
And the account number, there's logic in the system where it's auditing for a 10-digit account number. So what happens on a non-PO or contract where you do need to split accounts and a breakdown, you're going to want to put one set of account numbers within the account number field. And then this is where you would utilize the notes section to put your breakdown for any additional. I mean, now if you're also putting your account numbers on your invoice that has the breakdown, that's sufficient as well, because that's where we're going to see the breakdown and you can have the account number everywhere. But the account number field will need you to put at least one account.
Also on that notes section, there's a small help text there indicating to provide a description of the goods and services and the UT business purpose for the purchase. That's, again, that note is only on the non-PO form because that's the form that we didn't necessarily have a particular piece of prior approval for. And that's an instance where you might get an invoice that it's not clear to us what you purchased because all that's there is a vendor reference number that's meaningless to us. That's again to help us make sure that we're coding correctly and making sure that we're using the right accounts for the types of things that we're buying.
Contract, we're going to see the same thing as really as far as your non-PO. The difference is in non-PO, we put payee name because the non-POs, we want to try and capture when we're trying to pay a faculty, a staff member, a non-employee. And then your contracts are generally more just vendors that we're paying. Granted, sometimes we do pay independent contractors, but to kind of have to see where you might see some differences as far as vendor name and what pay name. We have the amount field here, and again, we have the account number. This one is going to have that contract number.
Again, in that contract number field, we are exclusively looking for the 4-digit year underscore 4-digit unique identifier from Contracts Plus. Don't put contract in front of it, don't put UT Austin, don't put the name of the vendor. We are exclusively looking for that number. That field can't audit because BFS, who also uses this system, has different formats, but we shouldn't see those here. That's the only piece, and the form can't confirm that something is not a duplicate if you enter the contract number 2 different ways.
For your, any DCO contract, as Stacey mentioned previously, the reason why y'all do not need to submit those with the invoice is because her team is gonna have access to the Contracts Plus, where they can go in and pull that information, if they need it.
And for the AT&T ones, it's leave it there.
So AT&T payments will not use the contract form because those are entertainment payments, so they will all go on the entertainment form.
Okay.
And there is a contract number on entertainment form, field on the entertainment form. It's optional. If you have a contract, you can add your contract number there, if you have a contract number, I should say. If you don't, again, with AT&T, you'll attach the contract as part of the payment. Entertainment invoices will always be paid on the entertainment form, not on the contract form, even if you have a contract. If it gets to us that way, we're gonna kick it back so that it can be done the right way.
And the other thing on the entertainment form, what you're not seeing on this form here is again, the account number. So the reason why we don't have the account number on here, because it is the account number that's associated with the OEM. Again, if you need to have a breakdown or anything of account, if you're gonna be using multiple account numbers, that wasn't maybe included on the OEM, put it in your next section.
So with that, you mentioned on the non-PO that we'd have to ask Stacy's team to like make that change or like add an additional account number. We would do the same for the entertainment.
No, oh yes, you can just make your note here of what the correct account number should be, cross it out on the OEF itself, and add in the new account number there. We're going to always look at the OEF. If you are making a note about it, do cross it out on the OEF so that there's not a question of a discrepancy there that we've got to come back to and take your time.
And did you say that we do include the contract if it's an AT&T contract?
Yes.
So currently, her team only has access to the Contracts Plus system. Right now, the AT&T contracts are utilized through DocuSign, and they're going into just another folder for right now. So we would like for the departments to submit those contracts currently for us. Again, once we get to the pro card log, really after the entertainment invoice reimbursement, that's where at the client end, y'all would essentially stop. There are a couple more items like the pro card log for payment that would be utilized at the AOM. There's a new request IDT correction that we're going to eventually start using within the system as well. So this is if you did process say you processed a PO. We didn't look at the account number when we submitted it. There wasn't a change order request. A month later, we're like, oh, we actually need to put that charge on a different account number. That's really where the AOM would go in there and let us know that, hey, we need to move it from this account. They have to provide the document ID number, what the amount is, how much we want to move to the other account. So we already know the firm account because that's what we paid it on when we processed the document ID number, but we need to know the amount that it's going to. So that's really something that for right now, we probably have to see AOMs utilizing that portion right there. Anything regarding payment requests before I show you some other functionality in here?
Are you taking questions?
There's a couple questions in chat, but I was gonna wait until the end. We wanna just do that with all the questions.
I think this was just more payment related. Since we have a little bit of time and we're almost done, I think I'm okay to take a few like payment related questions here.
Okay, I'm gonna jump into the chat real quick. We have a question, are we still approved to use a combined goods and services and invoice stamp in DocuSign as long as the information requested is all still shown? Yes, that can be one stamp, but it must have both pieces clearly specified. And if you have two dates on there, it needs to indicate which one is good service and which one is invoice.
And you just need the stamped page, not the certificate of completion, if you're using DocuSign and stamp.
If a vendor sends an invoice in January for services in April, should we request an updated invoice at the time of payment, or can we work off the original invoice? You can absolutely work off the original invoice as long as nothing has, the dollar amount is right. Move forward with that one, just make sure your invoice date stamp says January, your goods services stamp says April, and your net 30 goes off your April dates of goods and services. There's one other question in chat. If a vendor provides an address that the check should be sent to, should we provide that in the notes section? When a vendor submits an invoice to us, part of what deems an invoice as an official final invoice is that it specifies where payment is remitted to. AP will not approve a payment for an invoice that does not have an address specified. That needs to be specified on the invoice. If the vendor cannot adjust their invoice to say that address, then yes, that can be added in the notes section, and my team will add that in so that AP can see that we have there it is. This is one of the number one issues we have, is that a lot of the entertainment vendors have individual stores, but they want the payments actually sent to a processing center that is not their physical location. And especially for places like Jimmy John's or Jason's Deli that have multiple locations all over, all of the payments are in the same place. And that's why we look for that official invoice, so we know where to send it. When we send checks to the stores, vendors can't find our payment, or it takes a really long time for them to get that check processed. So first, I would recommend if your vendor is telling you, say via email or something, an address, request that they add that detail on the invoice.
Okay, so back to Tracker, just some of the other tabs that you'll see at the top, as on the home screen, where you're gonna see just your department invoices and my submitted invoices. You can also see that in the submittals tab as well. If you're just wanting to look at just yours, you can click on that. And this is where you can also filter, if you want to filter. So as you're starting to submit stuff, of course, this is gonna start growing. And then I also wanted to just show you just all the search functionality that Tracker has. So like in our current system, once something's approved, it really gets archived. Here, nothing's gonna get archived. Even here, once we implement this and you wanna go back and see, what transpired this year, and you'll be able to do that in here. So you will have that. So my thing is if you know the Tracker ID number, you can search it by Tracker ID number. Because of the robust functionality this has in the search, my hope is that there should not be any more departmental manual tracking logs of when you're submitting payments. Use the Tracker system and use your resources here. You can search by payee name, and it doesn't have to be specific. So if I want to search something for just me personally, Michelle Tanksley, I can put in MIC and it will pull up anything that has MIC within there. You can search by vendor invoice number, invoice check number, PO number. You can even just search by your submitter EID, or if you're searching for somebody else. So Michaela, if you're searching for something that maybe Kelly submitted into the system, if you put her submitter EID in there, it will pull up. And then you can also search by priority level. Right, and you can search by record type as far as what you submitted. But then you can also see there's department contact. If you want to look at particular statuses, you can search by statuses. This business contract status, don't even worry about that. Again, we used to utilize Contracts Plus, so that's not something that you would see in there. At the department level, it's already going to have your department that you're needing to search for. So I'm going to use Michaela and Kelly as that reference as well. So you would want to see accounting and NPA. So if you need to search between whichever department, you can search by that. The other thing that it has is once you're actually starting to search in here, there's nothing in here currently for you to search. Once you hit that search button, and it's going to pull up data for you, right next to this reset form, there's going to be an export button. So if you want to export that information into an Excel file, it will actually then download that information to an Excel file. So that's why you use this and get away from any manual practice that you're doing.
That reset form button is how you clear, say if you picked one of the statuses and did an actual search, that status is gonna stay highlighted and it's gonna apply to everything else until you reset the form. So even though that button's gray, it works. You just click that button to clear out anything you've already previously selected.
And as we start using this for a few years, you can then just even search by a name range in here as well. So it's a pretty robust functionality.
Is it allowed to show status of paid, or is it just if your payment's been approved?
So the statuses are gonna be submitted, so that's when you submitted it to within the system. So one key thing that I wanna point out as far as submitted, anything that gets submitted into the system, and we're gonna be going live on Monday, so anything that's submitted into the system on Monday will not be assigned out to the payment team for processing until Tuesday morning. So if you submit something, and maybe 5 minutes after you submit it, you're like, oh, I maybe transposed a number, or, oh, that PO number isn't the correct one, you can actually go back in there and edit the submittal. You can only edit it when it is in submitted status. Tuesday morning, when it gets assigned out, you can't take any more action on it at all. Because it is already in somebody else's queue of work. There is also a created status, so that's when the payment team has created the payment voucher in Define, and they've inputted the doc ID number within that tracker record, it automatically moves into a created status. Signature requested is when the payment team has initiated a DocuSign for that tracker record, and then it does show all of the DocuSign statuses in there as well. There is a assignee review status. So that's it, Tom's working a user record and he has a question about something that anybody submitted, he's gonna reach out to that individual, that's where he's probably fit in assignee review. Rejected status, that's where we rejected that invoice to the vendor. And then canceled status, that's where basically, maybe we reached out to you and we never heard anything, and 3-4 weeks go by, we're gonna cancel that tracker record. So canceling a tracker record basically makes that tracker record dead in the water. You can't bring it back to life, you can't do anything else with it. We would need you to recreate that tracker record. A rejected status, we can remove that rejected status and kind of bring it back in the queue and we can work out. And then it does show the approved. So the approved is when we approved it at the McCombs level. So within Define, there's so many different statuses. If you return something, it goes from proposed to rerouted. It was hard to really try to figure out when you could get that main accounts payable approval in there. Because again, not everything needs to route to main accounts payable. So we're just looking at when McCombs approved it. The other thing that the system shows is it's going to show payment information. Can't show you that right now since there's not anything in the system, but when it is final approved and that check is cut. So when the check, it's going to show payment date, it's going to show a check number. If it was an ACH direct deposit, it's going to show that information as well within the system. Once we start going live, we're going to then go out and do individual training within each department, and we're going to be able to show you a little bit more of that functionality and where you can see that status as well. So if we approve this just at the McCombs level.
I'm going back to the types of documents that are okay to use. So say you have a situation where you have an OOEFN and you have an event going on, you need to go like purchase, I don't know, cups or plates for an emergency that wasn't purchased, or you have to go pick up donuts or something like that. Does the OOEF count as the approval, or is there something else that?
The OEF covers that.
So it really.
The tax won't be reimbursed. Ever. We have a question in the chat. If we submitted a PO prior to today, but it has not been approved yet, do we need to wait and submit again next week when this is live? Or will anything already submitted go through even if not yet approved? So again, this is where the language gets a little bit sticky. To say that you have a PO submitted, well, that's a purchase request or a purchase order. That's not the payment part of it. If you have a PO payment that was submitted through SharePoint and your AOM has already routed it to the payments team, it's in routed status in SharePoint, my team will process it. You do not need to resubmit. If it has not made it to my team yet, then it would need to be resubmitted. There are not many of those things currently that we can see in SharePoint. Anything that's been done in the request form system, none of that changes. If it was the PO request where you're asking us to get a PO issued, that has no effect with tracker. We don't need to reissue.
I brought it this side again because we are go live on Monday. So really, as of today through Friday, we're gonna request that no payments or reimbursements be submitted. Because again, we really want to try to disable, hopefully we disable the SharePoint, the payment request. Because we need the payments team to have enough transition in time to process what's currently within their queue. Right, they're gonna still be working on some of that next week as well. But we want everything as of today to hold on to it until Monday and then submit. That doesn't mean stuff that you submit on Monday, you need to submit everything as rush or priority, just leave it as normal. Okay. Any questions about that?
Just a follow up to Madison's question, so I'm reimbursing for the donuts. Do I pick the reimbursement or do I pick entertainment?
That is all one. It looks like two lines there, but when you hover your mouse over it, what you can't see is when you hover your mouse over it, entertainment / reimbursement invoice is all one thing. So it's just entertainment.
But you could have a reimbursement there that doesn't have
And
an MOU.
entertainment could be a reimbursement.
Thank you.
Both of those still qualify as entertainment.
Is it helpful to include vendor IDs if you know that was kind of?
If you're 100% certain that it's accurate, you can include it, but with a lot of our vendors like Jason's Deli and Domino's Pizza and places where there are multiple locations, different locations have different EIDs. So you can just use the vendor name. When you are reimbursing an individual, you must include an EID. We can't find that information for you and confirm it. There might be 12 Ashley Joneses in defined. We don't know which is the right one. So really EID should only be provided if you're 100% certain or even individual.
Question for you. Do you have some kind of naming convention for, like a receiver?
Usually, I do it.
I just thought about that, I thought about it.
We're gonna jump back into Tracker real quick. We have an FAQ page.
And this is basically, these are all the questions, and you can use the arrow down when you're looking for a specific one. There is also just a toggle all, so you toggle all, it's gonna have all the questions in the end. So we do have the naming convention in here.
So we have some suggestions for naming conventions if your vendor's invoice doesn't have an invoice number. Again, ideally, if they give you an invoice that doesn't have an invoice number, you're gonna ask them to please update it with one so that we can uniquely identify it. If they are unable to do that for some reason, there's some suggestions there. As far as the file attached, the PDF attachment file that is your support documentation, there is no required formatting for that. There are some suggestions here, but we're not ever gonna send something back because it has the wrong
How about a receipt from a restaurant that doesn't have any kind of?
So that would be an instance where there's not a specific invoice number. We have it listed here as reimbursements. You would indicate where somebody made their purchase and the date they made it. So Carolyn 4822. Again, we want you to be as consistent as you can each time you enter that, so that when you go to enter the next one, it can audit appropriately. It won't be a perfect system, but
And
we'll do our best.
when you're doing reimbursements, the reason why we have the naming convention of payment, where payment was made in the day, that's gonna help that employee that's getting reimbursed easily to identify, oh, I did get my reimbursement for this particular, meal expense that I did. So that's why you wanna have that particular naming convention. And you see, as you're gonna start using the system, when you go in and input a tracker record, if you've already on a PO and you've already started, maybe you inputted something for myself, and I go back and try and submit a reimbursement for myself again, or pay myself, it would actually have a little drop, like it would kind of show up in a little drop down, so you can select that as well. So it will have that. You misspelled it incorrect the first time, that incorrect spelling is gonna be in there, so you know, maybe
Also,
check it as well.
If, once you click submit, it will open your tracker record. There will be a unique identifier at the top. It's called tracker ID number. It says that there. And as you're reviewing it, again, because we won't assign out until the next day, you'll have an edit submittal button at the top where if you notice that you have a typo either in your amount or your invoice number or whatever, you can go in and make that correction real quickly to move forward with that. Again, that's also something my team can correct. If it is already assigned to us, you can email us and say, hey, can you update this tracker record? You just won't see that edit submittal button anymore. And again, we'll go through a lot of this more in detail when we do our individual trainings. So I think that's on the next slide. We, as part of our payment services, we've got a new payments dashboard that will more closely relate to the travel dashboard and the purchasing dashboard. We will also schedule with each of your AOMs an individual department training. We are hoping that those are useful to you. You can bring to us questions that you think might only apply to you, but also just things that you have any kind of question about. It's not limited to things that are exclusive to you, but it's where we can really deep dive more and show you this is what this process looks like in Adobe or those types of details. This is our payment services page. On the left, you'll see some of the forms that are set up as DocuSign Power Forms right now. Many of those are listed on the support documentation guide, which is over on the right. Again, you can open that up to see the list of what, it's probably already open, so I don't know if it's gonna open again, but the payments versus reimbursements and what you would need to that. I recommend that you download that page and make a copy for yourself where you can keep whatever notes are relevant to the things that you handle on a regular basis. Sometimes we do things once a year and don't remember what we did last year.
If you have the current SharePoint payment request bookmarked, remove that bookmark. Because again, we're not using it as of today. I think, so the other thing we did want to point out, I don't know how many get the emails from purchasing, but there is also now a contract payment tracker, and they just have to name it similar to what our new system is named as well. So that is only to track spending of contracts. So any UT employee does have access to that. We need to utilize that. That's gonna be really dependent on, I mean, again, you have access to it, so you could go in, if you wanna go in and see how much you spent on this contract, you can use the system, but again, if you've submitted an invoice against it, you're gonna see that same information within our payment system as well. So you can't submit contract payments with that, that's just tracking the spend. So what UT has done now, any invoice that we process a payment against and define is we have to input the contract number. So we're trying to capture our spend against those contracts and to make sure we're not going over our spend limit on it. So I just wanted to point that out because that communication did go out and that system went live today as well. So it's all kind of going live around the same time. Going back to the individual department trainings, we will be scheduling those with each of the AOMs. So we want to schedule those with the AOMs and really the admin staff that are going to probably be in the system the majority of the time. So again, we can go over just a lot of deep dives if y'all have really any maybe specific department questions that we can help answer. And again, main thing with the new system, just let's all have grace with one another because it is gonna be a little transition and a learning process for us all. But our hope is that this new system will help provide some transparency and create some type of efficiency within the department and then within our payments team as well. And any other questions that we haven't answered?
Okay, are y'all, has the email already gone out, are y'all planning to relay to faculty that as of today, the reimbursement system on SharePoint is down?
We've sent out the email to all staff, so we can send out an email that includes it to all
I
faculty.
just didn't know if we needed to, if I needed to email that to myself.
I would advise you just to go ahead and email your faculty. Because once the type of that email and send it, so it might be a little bit of delay, but I would just be proactive and go and let them know.
Would Moon Tower to go be treated similar to AT&T payments where you would attach that documentation? Yep, that's go order form. Perfect.
Back to the earlier question about END, that is there, I didn't see in the FAQ, do you have it, do you want it, the person's name, like, let's see if you're down in notes, if you're providing UTID, if you're sure about that. That was already in the FAQ.
I don't think that's in the FAQ, it's a good thing that we'll add to it, we will try to update that frequently. It should go in the payee name vendor field, you can use exclusively the EID, but it is helpful if we have both the name and the EID, so that we can make sure there wasn't a typo. Sometimes if you transpose digits or something, it brings up an entirely different person, and we wouldn't know that that's wrong unless we can see both the name and the EID.
All right, one more question, what about vendors? I always think it's nice they include a copy of the PO when they submit the invoice. Should we pull that out of the documentation before
Yes,
we
please.
submit?
Again, we're trying to keep those files as small as possible so that when we upload for AP, they are only looking at what they need and they don't prompt questions or other things. The other thing is sometimes a vendor will include a copy of an original PO, but we've made an amendment to it. And so technically what we're attaching is not the most up-to-date version, which is why we don't need it. All we need is that PO number in the same required format.
That would also go along the same line with the OEF, correct? When the contract. The OEF, all that kind of stuff.
I'm not following, I'm sorry.
Kind of the bottom of the OEF, normally when we have them submit that in the payment support data, they're updating kind of the cost, the actual data.
The post-event.
Yeah, post-event information, all of that still has to be on your OEF. Again, that's kind of the only place for it. You can put it in the notes if you found that was there, but we're gonna look for it on the OEF, and if it's not there, we may end up accidentally emailing you when we didn't need to, so.
So leading up to entertainment, that's gonna be our next training that we'll be having and hosting. So we're looking at trying to get that hosted sometime, maybe June. I know May is commencement, so everybody's gonna be really focused on that, and we don't wanna do so many training sessions. So give us a couple of months to get through this new payment system, and if y'all have any questions regarding that, and then we'll look probably anywhere from June to maybe first part of July for entertainment best practices. So a lot of information kind of regarding entertainment. There's no other questions. That's it. Extra wrap. All right, thank y'all so much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
You.
Yeah.